Talk about POAI. Interesting day. Really, the only low float stock up. Everything else is penny runners. Penny runners. I mentioned in my weekly Patreon video that it's really a good idea to separate penny runners into their own category, right? So, when kind of analyzing market strength, we analyze penny runners, we analyze multi-day runners, and we analyze low floats, especially low floats above $2, right? And if you actually been paying attention since FFIE ran, a lot of the strength has been in pennies, right? Things like MGRX, MGOL, Lucy on Friday. A lot of the continuous strength has been in pennies. In low float still, we're getting plays like BTTR and plays like this. You're not really seeing massive gappers in the low floats. And even if they are gapping, you're not seeing a lot of continuation. So that being said, I came on. This was already bottomed out. I wasn't online for any of this move. But, we get a big walk down in the open, right? A lot of empty space, rotate into. And they had a lot of bids stacked down here in the pre-market. They had 220 bids, 210 bids. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll keep an eye on it. Maybe we get some type of market open long because it fit a decent amount of criteria for market open long, right? It was only up like 40%. I usually say you want you want lower gapping percentage if possible, 30, 40. Under 50 tends to be pretty nice. This is why plays like STSS and plays like that aren't really good longs. But I always say that, when you get these bottoming out plays in the open, I like to wait for market open. And, of course, the first thing I always say to look at is volume. You like that 1 million, 1.5 million share per minute volume. It shows that there's potential to the upside. But also what's really important is the book at market open. I think Bookmap is probably more important on market open longs than anything else because it could tell you a lot of on the potential of a market open long purely based on both the bid structure and the ask structure, right? You really want to see what the book looks like after market open. As market open opens, because the book will populate with new orders right at 9:30. It sometimes takes a few seconds for all the orders to kind of get in, but you really want to see what it looks like, right? And I'll show you what it looked like. So we have market open. We'll zoom out, and something you really don't want to see is a bunch of ass stacked to the upside, right? And it's very intuitive why you wouldn't want to see something like that, right? You wouldn't want to see. It's okay to have some ass, right? You'll get like 250 is a $0.50 level, so you're gonna get some ass stacked at 250 no matter what, stuff like that. But it's okay to have a few ass. That might be like 5K here, 10K, or maybe one big ass at like at a key level, like maybe some lower high level, or maybe at a $0.50 level. But you really don't want to see something like this, right? Where if you look at these numbers, this is how big the asks are. We see, 10K, 10K, 30K, 16K, 40, 20, 16, 20. Like you're getting like, if you add all these numbers up, it's 100, 150,000 shares on the ass, and that's all below high a day, right? So if you're expecting a rotation, zoom in like this. If you're expecting a rotation through this empty space up here, it's going to struggle, right? And, usually when you have too many asks, especially in a market where low floats aren't really pushing, two things tend to happen, right? The first thing that tends to happen is it pushes to those asks and immediately rejects. That's what happened here. The second thing that can happen it will start filling those asks, right? And as we've seen before, in my videos where I like to short, as I like to see big asks get filled, often in combination with a lack of bid follow-up, right? So big ask getting filled, lack of bid follow-up. Of course, this still depends on the chart, depends on the market conditions, depends on, a bunch of different factors that we talk about. But overall, that is very bearish, right? The market maker kind of, an idea here is I actually was hoping this would push 260 a market open. I might make a short read, especially if there's a lack of bid follow up. Because I used to long these. I used to see, the volume comes in. There's actually decent bid support down in the 220s here, and it respected those bids. So there's actually, everything else. If these asks weren't as big as they were, in 40K, 20K, 20K, 40K, this actually might have really rotated and pushed, based off the soak of the bids, but yeah, it didn't push to the level I wanted, right? Because like high day is at 280, so I really wanted to push. I was looking at these lower highs, 260, 267. I was like, it would be cool to push to the 260s and make a read, but I really didn't want to make a read down in the 250s, and just because when especially when the volume's there, the problem with shorting too far away from high day is that there's always a chance of a rotation later, right? And you could get in with a bad average too early. It's the same reason why I don't want to short this pop over here, even though, again, there's a lack of bid follow-up. We'll talk about this. This pop's actually really interesting. With too much empty space between where the liquidity move is happening and high day, there is a risk for a rotation. And in a strong market, this can really rotate and squeeze, and you can lose a lot of money. Or in this case, you get a much better trade later, right? And I'm totally willing to accept a market open fade on this, right? If this was going to fade the market open, I didn't make a single trade all day until this happened. I was willing to accept that. But yeah, we'll talk about kind of this structure, right? So it's trading good volume. So the volume is indicative that at least has potential to make a rotation later. It doesn't mean it's going to, but it tells me like, hey, tiny float, high volume, might rotate later, right? And of course, we get an instant dump right here. We get these quick, heavy dumps like sell, 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 sell. Create space for this to rotate back into here and here, right? But I want to talk about this little almost like W structure. We saw this 2 times last week, and it really kind of shows how manipulated long entries tend to work. On these plays that don't immediately push a market open, right? Sometimes you get the ideal market open long and just pushes. But on the plays that tend to rotate later, market makers will employ kind of the same tricks. Over and over. So we'll go to BDRX. So BDRX and GTBC both did this, right? Where a lot of times the way chart paint works, right? We all know about lower highs below high day, right? So high day was technically here, lower high, squeeze. But what's important is how these lower highs get painted, right? Like, what is the move that leads to the lower highs? What does the book look like on those moves? And what does the market maker do to rotate the stock later? And something that is extremely common, and this happened on BDRX, this happened on POAI today, and this happened on GTBC, is a lot of these lower high chart paint pushes, so this lower high, come after aggressive moves with no bid support. So this and this often have 0 bids pushing this up, which actually makes it a decent short opportunity, right? If you think, because here's the idea behind, because this is essentially a long trap becoming a short trap, right? Because idea is, you have a down only move, it rotates through the backside levels with no bid support, and then it usually fills a bunch of ask on the way up, and then it pulls and fades, right? That's kind of the idea. But what a market maker will often do is, if they're rigging it to the long side, is they'll pull it. There'll be a lack of bid support on these pushes. They'll pull it, and then they'll start throwing bids at lower levels to catch the stock to rotate it up, or they'll swipe those bids, do some crazy manipulated rotation, and they'll do stuff like this that's really hard to read. But if we go to GTBP, let's Let's go to this from this day. It's the same thing, right? Aggressive push, low, no bid support, creates a lower high. Aggressive push, no bid support, creates a lower high, and then they throw up bids. This one actually had clean bids stacked down here for the rotation. Now let's go back to POAI. This is essentially the same thing, just with less range. So we see that there is no bids on this 250 push. This gets pulled. We got this push, creating another lower high. If we go to the book here, this was really interesting because they threw up a 230,000 share bid to force this rotation, right? Which is very interesting because, again, there's a lack of bid support, so it knifes through the lack. And then they pulled the bid, but I didn't want to chase because, like, well, I don't want my average in the 230s. You know what I mean? It's like if I didn't want my average in the 250s, I definitely don't want in 230s. I was like, well, I guess they pulled the bid. I guess it might just roll over and die. But in reality, they kind of did a little fake out here. They did another walk down, and then they started rotating it for real. And my Discord called this out. It's like, oh, this rotation is really, really strong. And it's for the same reasons as GTBP and BDRX, is because of the chart paint, right? The volume in the chart paint, right? Really make, once you get enough lower highs, the more it starts to rotate to the painted lower, especially when you start to get like the third and fourth rotations, especially these third rotations. I mean, BDRX and GTBP both had these third rotations after double lower high chart paint. It's very bullish, right? But that doesn't mean it's going to squeeze a high today, especially if you're in a weaker market and there's a bunch of assets got to go through. So I decided to be bearish bias on this rotation, right? Because again, what market makers are often doing is they're trying to generate enough liquidity to fill these asks, right? There's a bunch. These are 30,000, 30,000, 40. These are big size asks. They have to paint a chart, soak shares, rotate the stock, fill those asks, and then pull it, right? So I learned from my longs, a lot of my longs, that you might have a good average, right? You might be long. You say you had a big brain read and you're getting in down here, right? With these bids of support. The problem is as it's great that those asks are getting taken out. You're like, oh man, these asks are getting taken out. It's going to keep going up. But I found a lot of those lacked continuation, right? And there would be a lot of longs where, I might make only like, maybe 8-10% on the first push. I would hold for more, then it would knife back to my average. I would get out. I'd make like 2% on a trade, and I would miss the whole short, right? And that happened to me over and over and over again. I was like, oh, big ass getting push, especially with no bids, is actually not good for longs, right? You don't want to see an overly stacked book when on the ass side when going long, right? So yeah, here's the rotation. I definitely wanted that 250 level to get taken out because that's the lower high from earlier from market open. That's a key $half level. You want that level to get pushed. So it's like, okay, wait for 250, wait for 250. Lack of bid support. What's interesting is it stalled at 250 here. So he hits, this is a 250 ask. It stalls. It starts to go sideways. They throw a bid up to initiate it, fills these ask, and then they pull the bid. And then ask started following this down. So this is my short here. And then over here, right? And then we zoom out. I'm like, well, thinking about my risk here is, I was like, well, I'll probably put it in the 260s, probably mid 260s, just because there's a lot of ass stacked higher. We could see 258 here. We could see 260. We could see 265. We could see 270. So probably want it farther up here. And also this is a little, I saw the quick dump to the 1 minute 20. But funny enough, this 1 minute 20 dump, actually huge brain. You actually could have longed here for at least this move. But the more something keeps testing the same MA, the less likely it is to continue. So when I saw the 1 minute 20 here, I was like, all right, I'm just going to bet that if this rotates off the 1-minute 20, that the rotation's going to fail. And it's going to break through these higher lows, right? You could see how aggressive these higher lows are here, right? This ultra aggressive higher low push is actually bearish, right? If you're viewing it from a manipulation standpoint, they're aggressively squeezing the stock through key levels, 3 key lower high levels, and you got a bearish book to go with it, right? You have a lack of bid support, you have bids getting pulled, you have 40,000 share ass getting filled. So we got a second rotation, and they did the classic little trick where they put up new ass. Those new ass get filled. It pushes even a little, makes a new high, which doesn't always need to make a new high. But I was watching very closely on this push. I was like, okay, lack of bid support. It's filling those new ass. This is kind of the chase rotation, right? The people who don't have the read down here are going to be chasing this rotation here to try to get in higher. If this fails, it should be quite bearish. And yeah, it stalled. New ass comes in, not a lot of bids. Also, apparently they have a newly registered ATM, so that's always a good thing. And yeah, faded, and that was the whole trade. And I waited all day for that. And the reason I was able, and that's just exactly how I approached the market, right? If I'm not in with an average over here, then I'm going to hope there's a rotation up to the level I want sometime later, right? Originally in market open, it was 2.6 because I'm looking at these lower highs. But then it became 2.5 bare minimum just based on this lower high, based on the half-hour level. So, range was not exactly the best, but it was 20%, and it was a pretty clean. And when stocks get weaker, that's a lot of times those are the type of plays you're going to get in low floats. So, you might not have massive range, but they do work better. So that's also a classic sign of a weaker market, right? Less low float, above $2 stocks in a pre-market, lower gapping percentage, thicker books, less continuation on rotations, shorts work better. You start seeing bearish books like this a lot more, but reward potential smaller, right? Unless you train the pennies, all the crazy pennies. Classic long trap on a stock up 200%, by the way. And then, what do you call it? God, what else? Oh, yeah. By the way, both Mikey and I thought this was the best long. We're both looking at this. We're like, oh, OBLG. Again, same reason why Lucy's a good long is the same reason this is a good long. Again, Mikey hit this. He got this in the 23s and 24s. I'm just not as good at him on the penny book. The penny books are just a little bit different than the low float above $2 books, and he's a master of those. So he knows, he's more used to it. So always good to study him. But yeah, those quick pre-market pop and dumps. This was opening like up 25% of the day. Volume comes in, 1 million shares per minute comes in. I just didn't have the read. He did. So shout out to Mikey on this play. Nice market open long in Pennyland. See, that's why there's a reason this is a better market open long, and this is garbage, right? And it has to do with the gapping percentage and where it's opening up on the daily, right? OBLG just has more potential. It just has more potential down here, right? If you want to hit 30%, 40% longs, whether it's in penny land or even in low float land, it's on plays like this, at market open. It's not going to be on SCSS. Anyway, so unless you got in, 4:50 in the morning pre-market or something like that, right? So anyway, that's it for today. Low floats above 2, not super impressive right now, and pennies, just look at the pre-market scanner. Pennies are still the strongest names. So that's it for today, guys. Information down below in the description about the Patreon and the Discord, and see you tomorrow.